This is one of the most frequent questions that's come up over the life of this channel, and it's a topic I expect will offend some people, but probably for different reasons. So what do the Amish think about homosexuality? Well, in a nutshell, they see it as a sin, and you're not going to find people that are both openly gay and in good standing as members of an Amish church. And maybe to state the obvious, there are certainly people with same-sex feelings born into the Amish community, as in any community of size. So what do the Amish think of that, and what happens to those people? I've got a few sources that I think cover this well. The first is a good nutshell take in a book called simply The Amish by Donald Craybill, Karen Johnson Weiner, and Stephen Nolt. From the book, the Amish consider homosexual activity a sin. Because they are not exposed to much television or other mass media, some Amish people are not familiar with the terms gay and lesbian or public discourse on the topic, although others learn about same-sex issues when they read local newspapers. No systematic research has measured the prevalence of homosexuality among the Amish. Some Amish people privately express same-sex inclinations, but they tend to keep their desires undercover. Those with homosexual inclinations who are married may feel dissatisfied and unhappy, but they nevertheless continue in their marriage, yielding their personal yearnings to the expectations of their church. In short, a de facto don't ask, don't tell policy seems to prevail. The Silent Struggle, an anonymous essay on homosexuality that appeared in the Amish publication Family Life, never mentions the word homosexuality. The essayist notes, "Many people have been this way since childhood. No one knows why. And our plain society keeps these people hidden, pretending there is no problem, offering no help." The writer goes on to advise, "Do not enter marriage just to be socially acceptable. You will hardly be happy, and it would be unfair to your partner." He or she summarizes by saying that there is hope, that people can change via God's power, yet also suggests that not everyone will or can change sexual orientation, and that it is God's will that such people accept remaining single. So that kind of gives you a general idea of how the Amish approach it. Now, what happens if people find out about homosexual behaviors among members of the church? So the authors continue on that point. Homosexual practice that becomes known must be confessed publicly in church. Most of the confessions are made by men, perhaps because women may be able to carry on affairs more discreetly than men. Some who claim a homosexual identity seek out others in the community with a similar inclination or look for counselors to help them claim a heterosexual identity. Some individuals leave the Amish community because they realize it is impossible to live as an openly gay or lesbian person in Amish society, but such cases are relatively rare. So that gives you a summary in a nutshell of how the Amish approach homosexual activity. Now, I should also mention here that Amish see such activity as sinful, but they also condemn other sex outside of marriage as sinful as well. But it's probably safe to say that in most, or if not all, Amish communities, same-sex behaviors are more taboo than, say, premarital sex. And just to explain more on why this might be, I wanted to share a couple more excerpts. These are actually both from James Cates, who is a clinical psychologist who has long worked with people from Amish communities in his practice. First, I want to share with you is called Serving the Amish, a Cultural Guide for Professionals. Cates writes that for those with same-sex interests, there is no organized subculture. If one defines the term gay as an individual who accepts homosexuality as an identity, then by default, there can be no gay Amish. To accept one's desires would be to deny the sect. Later, he continues, "This is not to say that same-sex sexual and even romantic relationships do not occur within the Amish sect. It is to say that these relationships are clandestine and devoid of the effort to achieve a subcultural respectability that exists for English same-sex couples." In a second book by James Cates called Serpent in the Garden on Amish sexuality, I wanted to share one quote from that book that I think captures the dilemma that Amish with same-sex feelings find themselves in. James Cates writes that, "I once worked with a young Amish man who struggled at length with whether to endorse his same-sex feelings or join the Amish church. He eventually did join the church, marry, and is comfortably ensconced in his family. Still, he made an eloquent statement that neatly placed his dilemma in context. In a moment of wrenching vulnerability, he said, quote, 'It would be wonderful to be in a same-sex relationship, but I would give up so much.' end quote. So why do people make that choice? What are they giving up? Now, Cates continues on that later in the book. He writes that such individuals among the Amish sacrifice these potential rewards, referring to being in a freely open same-sex relationship, because they balance them against the loss of the collective culture. They would no longer be a part of their extended family, church, and settlement, all of which offer support and intimacy in ways that would never be regained. They would lose a fiscal safety net that remains in place so long as they commit themselves to the Amish church. Perhaps most important of all, they would walk away from an identity as God's chosen with its undeniable understanding of right and wrong. They would step into a set of worldly values that, as they were taught, from cradle to grave, led away from the hope of an eternal life in heaven. They choose to remain with the Amish rather than give up so much. The Amish take a literal reading of the Bible. They reference parts of the Old Testament where homosexual behavior is condemned. As a conservative Christian group, this is really unsurprising in many ways. Cates also notes in A Serpent in the Garden that there's a more practical or pragmatic reason to be against same-sex behavior. He writes that they have the potential to erode the hierarchy of the culture. Also, one other reason here, quoting again from the book, quote, "The Amish revulsion for same-sex activity is rooted in the fundamental expectation that sex occurs for the primary purpose of procreation," end quote. So you see here a mix of both religious and, let's say, social or evolutionary reasons for being against homosexuality. So I hope that gives you perspective on both on how the Amish see this and from the perspective of those who do have same-sex feelings but find themselves a part of an Amish community. Whether that's an adolescent growing up or someone who's an adult and who may even be married. I don't have much experience knowing Amish people who are in this boat. I've come across it a bit. I've always thought it must be a tough place to be. Some people can reconcile it and remain members of the community. Of course, there are some that do not, and they maybe choose not to become Amish or end up leaving the Amish at some point after being baptized, which of course is going to make their circumstances even more difficult than if they were to just never become Amish, because then you've already got a commitment to the church through baptism, and any relationships you've created are going to be broken as well. So kind of a tough topic for both sides. From the Amish side, they're not viewing it generally in the same ways as non-Amish Americans are in 2023. They come at this from a different perspective. It's a close-knit conservative community. They're going to love those people, but seeing their behavior as a sin, they're not going to be able to condone the behavior. So that's why I said at the beginning, they're not going to be able to exist both as openly gay and as an Amish member of the church in good standing. If homosexual behavior became public by an Amish church member, then they would be expected to confess, as was mentioned. Then they basically have two choices: to make a confession and go through any type of church discipline and then return as a member in a good standing, or they may refuse to do that, and then they're likely going to be eventually excommunicated from the church. So, this is a challenge obviously for homosexual people, in an Amish context, and for the Amish church side, as well. Probably a tougher thing for the individual, I would guess. The way it's dealt with is probably not going to be seen as neat and pretty from some perspectives, but from other perspectives of the Amish as a conservative Christian community, not really surprising. The Amish are treating this as another form of sexual sin, and they also don't permit affairs outside of marriage. They don't condone premarital sex or other disruptions to marriage. For example, divorce is not sanctioned in the Amish church as well. So it's within a network of other, let's say, sexual or relationship transgressions or sins, although I think this one is probably considered, one of the most taboo in that category. I hope that explains that better. I tried to take a neutral, objective stance on this. I hope that came through in the video here. Interested in what you think on this? Let me know in the comments. Hit that like button if you got some value from this video. I appreciate that, and look forward to talking to you next time.